Hello and welcome again to another program of Searching for Answers, a program designed for you, the viewer, and the listener, as for all of us here on the panel. This evening, we want to tell you that we're happy that you've joined us. We're going to go a little different way tonight. Now, they don't know about it, but I'll tell you all about it in a little bit. My name is Carolyn Thompson, and on my right,
Richard Rice, Loma University.
And John Jones, La Sierra University.
Ivan Blazen, Loma University.
I would ask you to gather your books, Bibles, dictionaries, anything that you need to read along with us, and we're going to go to the book of Matthew, and we're going to read Matthew 24.
What did I tell you? I guessed.
Yes, you did. Okay, Ivan, why don't you read for us? It's entitled The Signs of the End of the Age.
All right, I'll start with 24:1. As Jesus came out of the temple and was going away, his disciples came to point out to him the buildings of the temple. Then he asked them, "You see all these, do you not? Truly I tell you, not one stone will be left here upon another. All will be thrown down."
Okay, John?
Yes, well, these are familiar words. Ivan, you are reading from the New International, the
New Revised
Standard, so I'm continuing in the same version. Familiar words to our viewers. Most of them have these words practically memorized, but from the King James, so it may run a little differently. Picking up now in verse 3. When he was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, "Tell us, when will this be, and what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?" Jesus answered them, "Beware that no one leads you astray. For many will come in my name, saying, 'I am the Messiah.' And they will lead many astray, and you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. And see that you are not alarmed, for this must take place, but the end is not yet. Nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines, earthquakes in various places. But this is all but the beginning of the birth pangs."
All right, could you continue on, Rick, please?
All right, beginning with verse 9, Matthew 24. Then they will hand you over to be tortured and will put you to death, and you will be hated by all nations because of my name. Then many will fall away, and they will betray one another and hate one another. And many false prophets will arise and lead many astray. And because of the increase of lawlessness, the love of many will grow cold. But the one who endures to the end will be saved. And this good news of the kingdom will be proclaimed throughout the world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come.
All right, I'm going to continue on for a little bit. That's verse 15 of chapter 24. So when you see standing in the holy place the abomination that causes desolation, spoken of through the prophet Daniel, let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let no one on the roof of his house go down to take anything out of the house. Let no one in the field go back to get his cloak. How dreadful it will be in those days for pregnant women and nursing mothers. Pray your flight will not take place in winter or on the Sabbath. For then there will be great distress, unequaled from the beginning of the world until now, and never to be equaled again. If those days had not been cut short, no one would survive. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be shortened. At that time, if anyone says to you, 'Look, here is Christ,' or 'There he is,' do not believe it. For false Christs and false prophets will appear and perform great signs and miracles to deceive even the elect, if that were possible. See, I have told you ahead of time. Now, you may wonder why we are going to Matthew 24, and we may even go on to the end to read more, but it's a long chapter, so I thought I'd stop right there. About June or July of last year, Ralph and I were talking about this program, and we were talking about whether we should talk about Jesus' second coming on the program or not. Because you hate to do it if people don't know what you're talking about, and you don't want to cause people to be stressed out. So we discussed it, and the phone rang. There was a gentleman on the phone. He knew my name, Carolyn, and he proceeded to tell me that I had told him sometime in the past, maybe 1 or 2 years ago, that I should share the story of Jesus and his second coming with people, but that they didn't want to hear it. And I was so shocked by this person who I don't know who it was. I said, well, you know, there's a mighty battle going on between good and evil, and you will run into this sort of thing. And hung up. I've never heard from him again. I asked Ralph what he thought of the fact that we had been talking about Jesus' second coming. What did he think? Was God trying to tell us something? But I ignored it because I wasn't sure. And because I'm not a theologian, and I just felt I wasn't worthy. But I decided this time that maybe I would do a few programs on Jesus' second coming and the signs that we are to look for to let us know that Jesus' coming is near. So I'll start with you, Rick Rice. Do you have anything in mind, like, for instance, Luke 21? I believe it's the signs of the end, and 2 Peter 3, 8 to 10. And Joshua 1, 5 and 1, 9. And my girlfriend, I don't know, you probably don't know her, but she lives a few cities away, and she says, well, Carolyn, I think you should do it. You should talk about it. And she gave me some verses. So I'm going to ask you, Rick Rice, if you will read a few verses concerning the end times and what we should look for before Jesus comes. Not to scare people. We don't want to do that. But we do know that there's things going on in the world that kind of remind us of the end times.
Well, I don't think we could focus on anything that's more central to the New Testament and its message than the return of Christ. It's certainly the heartbeat of Adventism.
Yes.
And it's a hope that I've grown up with and lived with my whole life. This sermon that you've directed our attention to, Matthew 24, and then it goes on into Matthew 25, goes by several different names. It's the last of 5 great sermons that Jesus preached.
Really?
In Matthew.
In Matthew.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And there are those who feel that the author of Matthew, the author of this gospel, was presenting Jesus as a great teacher who's the counterpart to Moses, the author of the 5 books of the Torah. So it's almost as if here we have a counterpart to the greatest teacher in the Old Testament or in Hebrew history. I think there's several things that are noticeable here. I think Jesus wants to prepare his disciples for what's coming. And I think he wants to reassure them that even though there's turmoil and distress in the world, that does not mean that his promise is somehow invalidated or will not come true. So in a way, it's designed to prepare them for what's going to come and at the same time reassure them that his coming is a certainty and will take place. Now, in a sense, that's described the situation of God's people ever since. You know, the sense that Christ's ministry here on earth is complete. He suffered, died, and came back to life. and then ascended to his Father and will return and take us to be with him. And that's the climax of John, and I think it's the climactic chapter here in Matthew. I think it starts in an interesting way because there's a sense in which the disciples, I think like any of us, are impressed with the structure of the temple there in Jerusalem. I mean, those massive stones, they call them ashlars, don't they? These huge blocks of stone that Herod built, the great builder, and put together this temple. And you almost sense the kind of, what would you call it, civic pride or a national pride that the disciples have, because they say, well, you look at these stones, aren't they magnificent? And Jesus uses that as a way of saying, be careful about what you put your confidence in. See, if you think that this massive structure is a guarantee that the future is going to be secure and predictable, don't go down that path. There's going to be a lot of distress to come. And so when they're together on the top of the Mount of Olives there, or at least we think they're up the slope of the Mount of Olives, they say, when is this going to happen? So, I mean, it's another case where what Jesus says jars them from their, what would you say, their relative complacency.
Yes.
And he says, no, you can't trust what your conventional expectations. The end is going to come very dramatically. But then there's this but there. The gospel of the kingdom will be preached, and then the end will come. So there's this notion of, we may not be able to tell exactly what's going to happen. Lots of problems are going to come. Lots of distress will take place. The world will be in turmoil. You can't see a clear path through it, but you can see what's clear beyond it. And then, in the meantime, your work is to be faithful to what God has called you to do. And so I think there's a whole sort of a cluster of things going on here. And I think these signs of the times are designed to unsettle us and keep us from becoming complacent with the sort of predictable sources of security that the world provides. Maybe financial security or vocational security if we have our careers and our jobs in place, or even a nice, pleasant family life or something like that. I mean, all of these things that are conventional, I think Jesus is saying, you got to look beyond those, because all those are subject to complete disruption.
Well, I think we have to keep in mind that much of this in Matthew 24 has to do with the destruction of the temple. It's very easy for us to jump immediately to the second coming of Christ, which is mentioned in this chapter, for sure. But we have to deal with the temple. And I would say to you that as you read down the line, all these signs that are from verse 3 right on through verse 14, for example, these are all signs of when the temple is going to be destroyed, which is what they asked. When will this happen, and what will be the sign of your coming? So they kind of brought two questions together.
That's right.
And probably in their mind, there was no way the world wouldn't end when the temple was destroyed. When that goes, everything goes.
It was the end of life as they knew it.
Right.
And so it was.
You talked about security. I mean, we know when AD 70 came around, some people fled into the temple thinking it was inviolate. Nothing could happen to the temple. Well, Jesus had already anticipated that something can happen to this temple. No matter how sacred it was, something terrible is going to happen. Well, you keep on going. Right after verse 14, the good news will be preached, and then the end will come. That's leading up to the temple, because what's the next verse? So when you see the desolating sacrilege standing in the holy place, then those in Judea must flee. So those are the Roman armies coming to the temple, and so on. So we have the temple thing, and then in verse 29, after the great sufferings that they're going to go through, and still in connection with the temple, then comes the business of sun, moon, and stars, cosmic cataclysms, and so on.
Falling of the stars, you mean?
Right.
That already happened.
Yes, we have that. And then, verse 30, then shall the real sign, the sign of the coming of the Son of Man will appear in heaven. I've often wondered, is that a sign related to his coming, or is that his coming itself? The sign of his coming is his coming, because it doesn't specify anything else here. They'll see him appear on the clouds. And
Is that a dual prophecy like in the book of Revelation?
well, I think this chapter is a dual chapter.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Would you go ahead, please?
Okay, how shall I go ahead?
Wherever
What would
you
like?
want. Mhm.
Well, where were we here?
I don't know where you read to.
Well, we didn't discuss it all. We kind of gave
Yeah.
some general overview
Yeah,
of things.
Well, maybe for the moment here, it's just worth picking up on what you said, Rick, a moment ago. Why wouldn't we talk about the second coming? I can't imagine why there would be any
Thank you.
hesitation or.
Because I sure did hesitate. Oh,
Well, I don't understand
know.
that. I
Well,
don't understand that at all.
bec-
It's in the middle of New Testament theology. It's the middle of the gospel. It's in the middle of our text, and so it's there, and it's important. I mean, what could be more so than Calvary? So, of course, naturally, it's simply part of our message, and we would surely pick up on it and go with it. We are interrupting our other series on 1 Corinthians. Now, I don't know if there's anything you want to say about that. Are we going to come back to that someday, or?
probably
Okay.
after we get through with this.
Okay, all right. Well, so here we are. We're shifting gears here. So we were looking at, was it verse 15, that odd expression,
Yes.
the desolating sacrilege. It's right out of Daniel, isn't it? And
Right.
it's not a Greek expression; it's a Hebrew expression.
Right.
You Hebraists out there, you Grecians out there, the bedegmulia tes eremosias or something like
Yeah.
that. The sacrilege that contaminates, and desolates. Of course, we
Probably
already.
if people are more familiar with the abomination of desolation.
Yeah, right.
That language.
Yeah,
we
that's
know.
it. Yeah. So when you see the abomination of desolation, that's the King James rendering,
Right.
and the
That's
holy
verse
place.
15,
Verse
yeah.
15. Good. Yeah. Thank you. Spoken of by the prophet Daniel, and then we've got this little off to the side. Now this is quoting Jesus. Jesus is talking to the disciples, right?
Right.
Rick has called it a sermon correctly. Indeed, Jesus goes on. This whole chapter now is Jesus uninterrupted. But we've got this odd little parenthesis in 15. Let the reader understand. We're not, I suppose, to imagine Jesus whispering off stage when there are no readers. I mean, there are people who are listening to him, but saying, let the reader understand.
Yes.
That's Matthew. Matthew has put this little zinger in here.
He wants us to get it.
He wants us to get it. Then those in Judea must flee to the mountains, and the one on the housetop not go down. We read that, didn't we?
Yes.
Pray that your flight not be in winter on the Sabbath. There will be great suffering. False messiahs, verse 23. Don't be deceived by this or misled. Take note, verse 25. I've told you beforehand. We need to take note ourselves of this expression in verse 25. Take note. There are half a dozen moments in this chapter 24 where the expression is wake up, be alert, be aware, be on your toes.
Right.
Watch out.
Watch out. Yeah, that's right. It comes first of all back in verse 5 again. 4, that's right. Beware that no one leads you astray. Again, verse 8. See that you are not alarmed. And it goes on. Now, we're going to have to come back and pick up on those and decode them and unpack them as we go. But clearly, this is to be conceived as a universal event, as a lightning all the way from east to west. So will be the coming of the Son of Man. And wherever the corpse is, there the vultures will gather. And then we have the catalog of signs, beginning in verse 29. Sun darkened, moon not give her light, stars fall from heavens. And as we understand it, all of these are enumerations of events that are to take place in the run-up to the second advent, but which have already transpired, to some extent at least, on one occasion or another. Therefore, this is a way of alerting us that the clock of the great cosmic clock ticks on, and that time may be drawing nigh. Then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven. Tribes of the earth will mourn, verse 30. They will see. Now you will see not signs and wonders, not signals and symbols. You will see the Son of Man
With
coming.
a loud trumpet.
Loud trumpet. Clouds of heaven, power, great glory. He will send his angels, loud trumpet. They will gather his elect from the four winds, one end of heaven to the other. This is clearly a cosmic event. It is a worldwide resurrection. It is an literally earth-shaking experience.
Okay, good, very good. Rick, will you continue on with 32? Or was it 30?
32.
32 is
Okay.
where John left off.
Okay.
From the fig tree learn its lesson. As soon as its branch becomes tender and puts forth its leaves, you know that summer is near. So also when you see all these things, you know that he is near at the very gates. Truly I tell you, this generation will not pass away until all these things have taken place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away.
Go ahead.
Want me to keep going? But about that day and hour no one knows, neither the angels of heaven nor the Son, but only the Father. For as the days of Noah were, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. For as in those days before the flood they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day Noah entered the ark, and they knew nothing until the flood came and swept them all away, so too will be the coming of the Son of Man. Then 2 will be in the field, 1 will be taken, and 1 will be left. 2 women will be grinding meal together, 1 will be taken, and 1 will be left. Keep awake, therefore, for you do not know on what day your Lord is coming. But understand this, if the owner of the house had known in what part of the night the thief was coming, he would have stayed awake and would not have let his house be broken into. Therefore you also must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an unexpected hour.
I underlined be ready. Go ahead. Who then is the faithful and wise servant, whom the master has put in charge of the servants in his household, to give them their food at the proper time? It will be good for that servant whose master finds him doing so when he returns. I tell you the truth, he will put him in charge of all his possessions. But suppose that servant is wicked and says to himself, my master is staying away a long time, and he then begins to beat his fellow servants and to eat and drink with drunkards. The master of that servant will come on a day when he does not expect him, at an hour he is not aware of. He will cut him to pieces and assign him a place with the hypocrites, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. All right, what do we need? What can we say about chapter 24 in the book of Matthew? What?
Well,
Oh my goodness, we only have a few minutes left. Go ahead.
Well, I think we've got a lot of themes here. One is the certainty of the coming.
Yes.
The other is the turmoil
Yes.
that will happen before. The other is the fact that there are that we can anticipate that, so we're not totally blown away by it. Okay, these things will happen, and then the importance of watchfulness. You know, when you see this happen, know it's near, and then the reaction. You know, don't be very careful. Things may look like they're just going along as usual, as in the days of Noah, and things can dramatically change in a moment. For me, if somebody says, well, what do we do in the face of all of this? I think the parable at the end of this chapter, if it's a parable or an illustration, what do you do in the face of that? And then he tells a story about the slave who's faithful. And I think the answer there is, you know what you should be doing? When the Lord comes, you should be faithfully doing the work he's called you to do. And so if you think that somehow the turmoil that's coming and these dramatic signs are designed to leave you completely bewildered as to what to do, or frantic and unfocused in your activity, then I think you've mistaken the thrust of this, and that is to do faithfully what God has called you to do, and realize that the kingdom will come in His own time and in His own way. That's what I get out of this.
I get out of that that He doesn't want us to be afraid.
All right?
He
That's
doesn't
very
want us
important.
to be worried. Every little thing that happens, don't say, well, He's coming. But on the other hand, be watchful, because you might be wrong.
Yes.
Well, I was going to say that there is a fearful thing that some people have interpreted, at least, fearfully in this chapter. And that's the part that maybe we take comfort from, but some people do not. And it is be ready. And people say, what does it mean to be ready? And am I ready? Are you ready for Jesus to come?
There's a hymn or a song like
Oh,
that.
yeah, that's
Are
why
you
Faithful in all that you do.
Are you faithful in all you do? So a lot of people are asking, what do I do to be ready? I want to be ready when Jesus comes, but what does it take? Give me some of the steps or the ingredients, that should be involved in my readiness. Now, one of the points of being ready is, of course, to read this chapter as we just did, and to note that Jesus is kind of shaking us up, causing us to think about it, and so be ready in the sense that your mind is dwelling on the subject of His coming. That's one thing. And I see that we're coming to an end, just like this chapter announces the end. We're at the end, and I'm ready.
Okay. Thank you, Ivan, and all of you here on the panel. I enjoyed that very much. And I hope our listeners will take this to heart and make sure that they're ready, not to be frightened, but to be ready when Jesus comes. This is Carolyn Thompson for Searching for Answers.